I'm going to go back to, I don't know, did you make a note of any of Ger's original points that he raised or questions?
We
and
have
then
some
you
of the
can
notes,
come
yeah.
back. Is that okay?
So, Senator, just to address the points or the questions you raised earlier in sequence. Permanent Defence Forces officers, no, there are no longer any Permanent Defence Forces officers with all of the reserve units around the country. But that said, all reserve units around the country are actually part of what were Permanent Defence Force units. So technically, yes, they do have officers, permanent officers within their chain of command, but none that you could argue are assigned solely to deal just with their reserve, except for the Office of Reserve Affairs. But that's not in it, kind of.
Can I just hold you there for a second? Eugene, you mentioned your 27 Battalion. So you're answerable to the CO of the 27 Battalion, PDF CO of the 27 Battalion. And are you then a peer equal with your fellow officers within the 27 Battalion?
I would say so, yes. Again, this is something which has developed in recent years, and it is a product of working very closely with them and also supporting them as well. When they need us to assist them with security duties, for example, they're pinched. I mean, without speaking for the other representative associations, who I'm sure will have their own way of expressing their challenges there, but we recognise we're all part of the same unit. So we'll all get stuck in together. We'll all undertake the duties as best our availability allows, because there's only so many days holidays most of us get throughout the year, so there's a limit on our own availability. So when we go in and we do as many duties as we can, we'll also assist on other taskings that come to us. So there might be regimental duties, and there could be exercises as well that the unit might need us for. And it's not just necessarily for the enemy roles, as you know, which would have been typically would have been that, but actually properly integrated into the unit as well. So when they get to see us operating and they get to see the enthusiasm of reservists and the lifting the burden of work on already stretched comrades in the PDF, they appreciate it. And look, we love the job, we love doing it for the sake of the job as well. We're not, and here's the thing, we're not doing it for the sake of making money or getting paid, right? There's no pension, there's no gratuity, there's nothing like that we get at the end of it. But not being paid is the problem. Not being paid is the hygiene factor. That's the thing that you can't go home and justify to your family, well, I'm after using half a tank of petrol or diesel to get there. I'm loading up the washing machine with a dirty uniform after being out on the ground for 48 hours or whatever, and I get nothing for it. Like, that's the bit that stings, So, again, to your point, absolutely, there is no issue at all. There is great mutual respect. I'm happy to say that. And they recognise that we are a very, very valuable part of the unit. And that's
I think it's important, Chair, to put it on the record. Eugene, you made the point that you are an integral part of the unit in every way, except for if they're deploying overseas, you can't deploy. We have not protected your employment with legislation yet. So if we call up a member of the reserve, let's say one of the three in front of us, we'll take Miss McCarthy because she moved you from Belmullet out to West Cork, so she saved the day for you. Let's say she has a specific expertise in cybersecurity, say, and we're going to the Lebanon and we need that person. There's nobody in the PDF available. We bring her. We can't protect her employment while she's gone. And there are all sorts of hurdles to be gone over before we could, even though we say they can serve overseas, they can't. Sorry, Neil, if you continue on, please.
Actually, just on that very point, Senator, we can now serve overseas, and we've actually got people overseas right now as we're having this meeting.
Excellent.
So it is quite wonderful, and some high-profile missions and high-profile engagement, and particularly in the cybersphere, where technical specialists are going to overseas missions and lending their qualifications and skills to those missions. But the second half of your point is quite correct. There is no employment protection legislation in place to ensure their job is waiting for them when they come home. So what ultimately dictates whether reservists can or can't go overseas is their personal circumstances. Their job might be willing to wait for them, or maybe they're self-employed and they can take that break, but general employment protection legislation does not exist, which probably is prohibiting a significant number of reservists who otherwise could and would go overseas from applying. But the ability to go is there. The support to go is not there. is the way we would look at it.
Can I add in, as an employer as well, you would be a little bit slow to take on a reservist if you knew that there was going to be a stopgate, that you had to let someone go for up to 6 months, who you've already invested in their training, everything. You've already probably put something into their pensions and things like that. And if they're just gone, who's now going to do that role? Am I going to have to invest again in someone for 6 months? Are they going to leave? So there's a lot to sort out there. It's not a small issue.
Speaking of the cyber area, the Taoiseach during the last committee made the point that the RDF was going to have to change with respect to recruitment, and he envisaged a situation where, particularly in areas like cyber and places like that, that perhaps a follically challenged, rather rotund gentleman or lady could serve in uniform, albeit that they wouldn't pass fitness tests, but they would bring a level of expertise that would work in an office situation. Have ye taken a stand or a vision on that?
I think the position on it from our association's perspective, and I think wider military management and the Department of Defence, is absolutely open to all avenues of service by anybody who can contribute meaningfully to military service within the state. So I think in big picture, strategic level speaking, the openness to all of these initiatives is there, but the practical way of implementing them, how would you potentially recruit your 100 cyber experts who are technical specialists in their field if you told them that a significant proportion of what we'll actually have you doing you will not be paid for in any way, shape or form? And that's our difficulty, and that's what we're primarily communicating today. To achieve the stated government policy of building a operationally capable reserve, and that is a fantastic objective, is somewhat undermined by then saying, oh, and by the way, you have to do a lot of stuff for free. So that's our key message today.
Okay.
Can I just ask you, is there an upper age limit for people, say, retired experts, as we're talking about? Is there room for?
So at the moment, Kerlock, the upper age limit for somebody with no previous military service is 39, and with prior military service in the Permanent Defence Forces or in the reserve is 45. But even those upper age limits are currently being investigated for raising, on the ground that some specialists will take decades to become technical experts in their field. So if they're in their late 40s or 50s, so what? If they're going to be used in a particularly cyber or medical or engineering sphere or whatever it might be. So all of that is on the table for discussion at present.
I would say beyond that, even, beyond that, where you have people who have retired and particularly, maybe are in a certain financial position but want to give something back. To me, it would seem like an ideal opportunity to give something back, to then share your expertise for the good of the state.
Some international militaries do have specialist technical reserve appointments where they will allow people up to the age of 70 to apply. That's obviously not currently the case here, but it is internationally, and for very particular technical roles, and be they medical specialists or whatever, they will have it up as high as 70.
We learned, Chair, from the HSE attack, the attack on the HSE, that there is a frontline cyber defence through the Gardaí, through the CIS and the Defence Forces. The second tier, the second line reserve, and this requires the employment legislation we're talking about, are people who are working in the cyber industry, could be shifted from their current work into an emergency situation where a national utility or a national organisation had been attacked. And then part of a vision document that we've been working on for some time is that there would be a tertiary or a third tier called the Cyber FIANA, if you want to call them that, right, who would be less qualified but would be available for some of what you might call the grunt work that's required following a major cyber attack. In the HSE case, the reconfiguration of every machine in the country. And in order to ensure that that is an organisation that's dynamic and flexible and available, it is my view that they would be ideally suited in the RDF, where they would have the discipline, they would have the training, they would have access to ongoing training at the latest and greatest technology there is. And that's an area we need to focus on. We need to stop thinking of RDF as infantry soldiers and start thinking of them as experts that are available and have the training that everybody else has. I'm sorry for interjecting again, but really the work you do is incredible for the small number there is.
Yeah.
Just if I could follow on just on what the Senator has referred to. Yeah, again, harking back to my own background a number of years ago in cybersecurity, and it's one of these examples which is often quoted, that and medical expertise, for example. We have highly qualified doctors, anaesthetists and surgeons and people like that in the reserve who ought to be utilised and are perfectly willing to do so. But the overarching issue in relation to the utilisation of members of the reserve for a specialist role does come back to employment protection. This is not something which we specifically prepared for to present on today. We had another more urgent issue which we have debated and we've discussed. But reform of employment protection, and actually even just the creation of appropriate legislation which would protect reservists in every form. There are so many questions have to be addressed. Simple basic things like what would happen if a reservist is injured or is killed, accidentally or in the line of duty when they're serving their country. What happens to their civilian pension, to the sick pay scheme that their employer is paying for? Who bears responsibility for this? We've touched upon this with the Working Time Directive has brought a little bit of focus to this particular challenge, these type of questions. This is something which RDFRA has tabled with the Department and military management for the last number of years, and we say that it's not quite urgent yet, but it is very, very important, and please don't underestimate the amount of work that it's going to take in order to look at this. Now, we're informed that that work is about to commence if it hasn't already done so. There's a consultant group being established to look at it and look at the requirements of what needs to be done. But that is a significant body of work. I work in industrial relations at this point myself, and I can tell you to look at it and look at the requirements of what needs to be done. But that is a significant body of work. I work in industrial relations at this point myself, and I can tell you there is a lot to be done there, and it's going to be a significant block at some point in the future for both recruitment and for the utility of reservists. Because if you consider the scenario where there is another attack, another cyber or hybrid attack made on the state, presumably the same critical infrastructure is also within the domain of the private operators as well. So mobile phone companies, broadband companies, people like that. They are also going to look for the very same experts to look after their infrastructure. And if the state or if the military approaches a CEO of an ISP to say, no, we need that individual to come do something for the HSE, how is the employer to respond? They say, well, hang on, I've paid for their training, I've paid for their certification, I keep their ongoing training going, I'm paying into their pension. They work for me for 48 weeks of a year, or, depending on what it is. So surely I have first call. So these questions, and that have to be thrashed out. Government policy has yet to catch up in that particular area. That we have a view. Obviously, we would suggest that there is a greater priority in service to the state, but we're reservists. We would say that, wouldn't we? But there's a significant piece of work.
I really do want to go on to Senator Coyne.